If you're reading this, you probably already think I'm the bad guy. Spoiler alert, I am, but only because she wrote the screenplay for my transformation. My name is Carson Hale, and I'm 34 years old. I work as an IT project coordinator for a tech firm in downtown Boston, which means I spend my days translating between engineers who speak in code and executives who speak in buzzwords. It's not glamorous, but it pays well enough to support what I thought was a partnership with my wife, Jenna. I should have seen the warning signs earlier, like when Jenna started referring to herself as the prize in casual conversation, or when she began every financial discussion with, "Our income is ours, mine is mine." But love makes you stupid, and I was Olympic-level stupid for 3 years of marriage. Jenna Marlowe, she kept her maiden name for professional reasons, worked as a boutique stylist in Back Bay. She had this way of making you feel like you were lucky to be in her presence, like she was doing you a favor by existing in your orbit. Her Instagram bio read, "Living my best life, your blessed daughter, boss babe," and she had about 3,000 followers who hung on her every perfectly filtered word. The morning everything started to unravel began like any other Tuesday. I was making coffee in our cramped kitchen when Jenna swept in wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. "Carson, honey," she said, not looking up from her phone. "Blair and I are having brunch at that new place in Newberry Street today, the one with the bottomless mimosas." "Sounds fun," I said, handing her a mug. "What's the occasion?" She finally looked at me, and I caught that familiar flash of irritation in her green eyes. "Do I need an occasion to enjoy myself? God, you sound like my accountant." "I just meant... Besides," she continued, scrolling through her phone again, "Blair's treating. Her new client just bought a whole wardrobe refresh. Some tech guy with more money than sense." I should have asked more questions. I should have wondered why my wife never seemed to have clients with more money than sense. Instead, I kissed her forehead and headed to work, where my buddy Dev was already at his desk, surrounded by empty energy drink cans. "Morning, sunshine," Dev said without looking up from his monitor. "You look like someone pissed in your cornflakes." "Just the usual domestic bliss," I replied, settling into my chair. "Jenna's having another expensive brunch." "Ah, yes. The princess must maintain her lifestyle." Dev finally looked at me, his dark eyes serious behind thick-rimmed glasses. "Carson, man, when's the last time you did something you wanted to do?" It was a simple question, but I couldn't answer it. When had I stopped having wants that didn't revolve around keeping Jenna happy? The day dragged on with the usual parade of meetings and crisis management. Around 3 o'clock, I got a text from Jenna. "Brunch was amazing. Blair's friend Max is so successful. Might have some styling opportunities." Something about that text bothered me, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the excessive punctuation, or maybe it was the fact that Jenna never used heart emojis when talking about work. I was still thinking about it when I got home that evening. Jenna was in the bathroom, getting ready for what she called her evening routine, a 45-minute process involving more skincare products than a department store cosmetics counter. "How was brunch?" I called through the door. "Oh, it was wonderful. Blair's friend Max is this incredibly successful businessman. He owns several properties downtown, and he's looking for someone to help him develop his personal style." "That's great, babe. What kind of business is he in?" There was a pause. "Import-export, I think. Or maybe real estate. Something lucrative." Something about her tone made me pay attention. Jenna was usually precise about details, especially when it came to potential clients and their spending power. "Did you get his contact information?" "Of course I did. I'm not amateur." Another pause. "Carson, can we not do the 20 questions thing? I'm trying to relax." I dropped it, but the seed of suspicion was planted. Over the next few weeks, Max became a frequent topic of conversation. Max this, Max that. Max had such refined taste. Max understood the value of investment pieces. Max appreciated quality. "You should meet him," Jenna said one evening as we sat on our couch, her scrolling through Instagram while I tried to watch the news. "He's really interesting. Worldly." "Sure," I said. "Why don't you invite him and his wife over for dinner sometime?" Jenna's thumb stopped scrolling. "His wife?" "Yeah, his wife. Most successful businessmen our age are married, right?" "Oh, right, his wife. She travels a lot for work." The way she said it made my stomach clench. I'd heard that tone before, usually right before she told me about some expensive purchase she'd made for work. That night, after Jenna fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. 3 years of marriage, and I was starting to feel like a stranger in my own life. When had I become the guy who paid for everything while his wife collected investment pieces and had mysterious brunches with successful men? The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I'd had a particularly brutal day at work. A client presentation had gone sideways, and I'd spent 6 hours putting out fires. All I wanted was to come home, order pizza, and watch something mindless on Netflix. Instead, I walked into our apartment to find Jenna dressed to impress in a black dress I'd never seen before. "Where are you going?" I asked, loosening my tie. "Remember I told you about Max's business dinner? He invited me to join him and some potential investors. It's a huge opportunity." I didn't remember her mentioning any business dinner, but my brain felt like mush. "Okay, have fun." "Oh, and Carson?" She was checking her makeup in the hallway mirror. "Can you Venmo me $200? I might need to cover drinks or something, and I don't want to look cheap." $200 for drinks? She turned to face me, and I saw that flash of irritation again. "It's networking, Carson. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money. I thought you'd understand that, being in business yourself." I wanted to point out that my business involved salary negotiations and project timelines, not mysterious dinner meetings with married men whose wives were always traveling. Instead, I pulled out my phone and sent the money. "Thank you, baby," she said, kissing my cheek. "You're the best." After she left, I sat in our empty apartment and tried to remember the last time Jenna had thanked me for something that didn't involve my wallet. I came up empty. That weekend, we went to dinner with our friends, or rather, the people Jenna had decided were our friends. Blair, her partner in crime, was there with her boyfriend Rick. There was also another couple, Tom and Sarah, who worked in marketing and always seemed to be documenting their lives for social media. We ended up at an upscale steakhouse in the North End, the kind of place where the menu doesn't have prices and the waiters introduce themselves like they're auditioning for Broadway. Our waiter was a young guy named Jake who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I liked him immediately. "Good evening, folks. I'm Jake, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with some drinks?" Jenna immediately ordered the most expensive cocktail on the menu. Blair followed suit. Soon everyone was ordering premium everything: top-shelf liquor, the finest cuts of meat, sides that cost more than most people's entire meals. I ordered a beer and the cheapest steak on the menu, not because I couldn't afford better, but because the whole display was making me nauseous. "Carson, don't be boring," Jenna said, loud enough for the table to hear. "Live a little." "I'm fine with what I ordered." "He's always been practical," she said to the group, and somehow she made practical sound like a character flaw. "It's cute, really. Very stable." Blair laughed. "Stable is good. My last boyfriend was exciting, and he left me with a maxed-out credit card and trust issues." "Oh, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with stable," Jenna continued, taking a sip of her $20 cocktail. "It's just that some of us need more stimulation, more excitement." The conversation moved on, but I caught the look that passed between Jenna and Blair. It was the kind of look that said they'd discussed this topic before, probably in detail. As the evening progressed, I found myself observing rather than participating. Jenna was performing, that was the only word for it. Every gesture was calculated, every laugh perfectly timed. She was the center of attention, and she loved it. When the check came, there was an awkward moment of wallet fumbling. Everyone seemed to assume that everyone else would contribute equally, but the bill was astronomical. "Carson's got this," Jenna announced cheerfully. "He's so generous." I stared at her across the table. We hadn't discussed this. We hadn't discussed anything about this dinner, actually, except that we were going. "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone to calculate, "let's split it properly. Jenna and I will cover what we ordered." The table went quiet. Jenna's smile faltered. "Carson, don't be weird about money," she said, laughing uncomfortably. "I'm not being weird. I'm being fair." I did the math quickly. Jenna had ordered the most expensive items on the menu: a $40 cocktail, a $60 steak, a $15 side, and a $12 dessert. Plus tax and tip, our portion came to about $90. I put $100 on the table and stood up. "Carson, what are you doing?" Jenna hissed. "I'm paying for what we consumed," I said calmly. "Just like everyone else should." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, Tom cleared his throat and reached for his wallet. As we walked to the car, Jenna was furious. "That was embarrassing," she said. "You made me look cheap." "I made you look cheap? You ordered the most expensive thing on the menu and then announced that I'd pay for everyone." "It's called being generous, Carson. It's called being a good host." "We weren't hosting. We were invited guests." She stopped walking and turned to face me under a streetlight. In the harsh fluorescent glow, her carefully applied makeup looked like a mask. "You know what your problem is?" she said. "You don't understand that sometimes you have to invest in relationships. These people could be important connections for both of us." "Important how?" "Blair knows people. Tom and Sarah have connections in marketing. These relationships could lead to opportunities. What kind of opportunities? God, Carson, do I have to spell everything out for you? Business opportunities, career advancement, the kind of success that requires vision. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and realized I was seeing her clearly for the first time in months. She wasn't talking about us or our success. She was talking about her success, funded by my stability. Let me ask you something, I said. When's the last time you paid for dinner when we went out together? That's different. How is it different? Because we're married. What's yours is mine. And what's yours? She blinked. What do you mean? You said what's mine is yours. What about what's yours? Is that mine too? For a moment, she looked genuinely confused, like the question had never occurred to her. Carson, you're being ridiculous. Can we just go home? We drove home in silence, but something had shifted. A door had opened in my mind, and I couldn't close it again. The next morning, Jenna was back to her normal self, chattering about her day while she got ready for work. I'm having lunch with Max today, she said, applying lipstick with surgical precision. He wants to discuss some styling projects for his business associates. Where are you meeting? Some little place downtown, nothing fancy. After she left, I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee and tried to make sense of what I was feeling. It wasn't jealousy, exactly. It was something deeper and more unsettling. I was starting to realize that I didn't know my wife at all. The revelation hit me like a cold slap while I was debugging code at work the next Wednesday. Dev was rambling about his latest dating disaster when he said something that stopped me. The crazy thing is, she kept talking about this other guy, how successful he was, how he understood her ambitions. I'm thinking, lady, if he's so great, why are you here with me? I looked up from my monitor. What did you do? I paid for my own meal and left. Life's too short to audition for the role of backup plan. Backup plan. The words echoed in my head for the rest of the day. That evening, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I went through our joint bank account statements. What I found made my stomach turn. Over the past 3 months, Jenna had spent over $4,000 on what she categorized as work expenses. Designer handbags, expensive lunches, spa treatments, clothing that cost more than my monthly car payment. Meanwhile, I'd been brown bagging lunch and wearing the same 3 shirts to work. But it was the pattern of her spending that really caught my attention. Every Tuesday and Thursday, the days she claimed to be meeting with potential clients, there were charges at high-end restaurants and boutiques. Always for 2 people. Always paid with our joint account. I was funding my wife's dates with another man. The next morning, I called in sick to work and did something I never thought I'd do. I followed her. Jenna left our apartment at 11:30, dressed in an outfit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She drove to a trendy cafe in Back Bay where she met a man who definitely wasn't a client. He was tall, well-dressed, and handsome in that generic way that screams trust fund baby. They sat at a corner table, and even from across the street, I could see the way Jenna leaned into him, laughing at everything he said. This had to be Max. I watched them for an hour. The way she touched his arm, the way she threw her head back when she laughed, the way she looked at him like he was the most fascinating person in the world. It was the way she used to look at me, back when we were dating. When they left the cafe, Max walked her to her car and kissed her cheek. Not a friendly peck, a lingering, intimate gesture that made my hands clench into fists. I followed him to his car, a silver BMW that probably cost more than I made in a year. When he drove away, I memorized his license plate. That afternoon, I did something that would have horrified the old Carson. I hired a private investigator. Her name was Ms. Vance, and she came highly recommended by a guy I knew who'd gone through a messy divorce. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, and had the kind of no-nonsense attitude that made me feel like I was finally talking to someone who understood the situation. So, your wife is having an affair, she said, reviewing the information I'd given her. I think so. I mean, I don't have proof they're sleeping together, but... Mr. Hale, let me stop you right there. In my experience, when a married woman starts having secret lunches with a wealthy man and lying to her husband about it, we're not talking about a book club. She was right, of course, but hearing it said out loud still felt like a punch to the gut. What I need from you, she continued, is a clear picture of what you want to accomplish. Are you looking to save your marriage, or are you looking to end it? I thought about that question for a long time. I want the truth, and I want to protect myself. Smart man, give me 2 weeks. While Ms. Vance did her investigation, I started my own quiet preparation. I opened a separate bank account and began transferring my salary there. I made copies of all our important documents. I even started looking at apartments just to see what was available. Most importantly, I started paying attention to Jenna in a way I hadn't in months. She was different now, more secretive, more defensive. She guarded her phone like it contained state secrets and had started working late several nights a week. When I asked about her day, her answers were vague and evasive. "How was your meeting with Max today?" I asked one evening as we sat on the couch. "Fine," she said, not looking up from her phone. "What kind of styling work is he looking for?" "Just general stuff, professional wardrobe updates." "For him or his employees?" She finally looked at me, and I saw a flash of panic in her eyes. "Why are you asking so many questions?" "I'm just interested in your work." "Well, it's confidential. Client privacy and all that." Client privacy. Right. 2 weeks later, Ms. Vance called me into her office with a manila folder that would change everything. "Your instincts were correct," she said, sliding the folder across her desk. "Maxwell Harrison, 36, married to Elise Harrison for 8 years. He owns 3 investment properties downtown and has a pattern of what we might call extracurricular activities." I opened the folder. Inside were photographs, credit card statements, and what looked like text message transcripts. "How did you get all this?" "Mr. Harrison isn't as careful as he thinks he is. He uses the same credit card for all his affairs, and his wife hired me 6 months ago to document his infidelity." I stared at her. "His wife knows?" "Oh, she knows. She's been building a case for divorce. What she didn't know was that your wife was the latest in a long line of married women who think they're special." The photographs were damning. Jenna and Max at restaurants, holding hands across tables, Jenna and Max entering a downtown hotel, Jenna wearing jewelry I'd never seen before. Jewelry that, according to the credit card statements, Max had purchased, but it was the text messages that really gut-punched me. Max: "Can't wait to see you Thursday. Wear the red dress." Jenna: "Carson's working late again. He has no idea how boring he's become." Max: "Poor guy. Doesn't know what he's missing." Jenna: "He's a good provider. I'll give him that. But God, the man has no vision, no ambition." Max: "You deserve better." Jenna: "I know I do. That's why I have you." I read through dozens of messages, each one more painful than the last. They talked about me like I was a paycheck with legs, a convenient source of funding for Jenna's real life. "There's more," Ms. Vance said gently. "Mrs. Harrison would like to meet with you." Elise Harrison was nothing like what I'd expected. She was elegant, composed, and absolutely furious in the way that only comes from years of suppressed rage. "I'm sorry you're going through this," she said as we sat in her lawyer's office. "Maxwell has put us both in an impossible position." "How long have you known?" "About the affairs in general? 2 years. About your wife specifically, about 6 months. She leaned forward. "Mr. Hale, I'm going to be direct with you. I want to destroy my husband financially and socially. He's humiliated me for years, and I'm done being the understanding wife." "What does that have to do with me?" "Maxwell thinks he's clever, but he's sloppy. He's been using marital assets to fund his affairs, expensive gifts, hotel rooms, restaurant bills. In Massachusetts, that's considered dissipation of marital assets." "Meaning?" "Meaning I can claim those expenditures in our divorce settlement, but I need documentation of his pattern of behavior." She smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. "Your wife's affair is just the evidence I need to prove he's been systematically stealing from our marriage to fund his hobbies." I understood what she was proposing. She would provide me with evidence of the affair, and I would provide her with testimony about Max's spending patterns. "What about Jenna?" "What about her? She's a married woman having an affair with my husband. In my book, that makes her complicit." That night, I sat in my car outside our apartment building for 2 hours, trying to work up the courage to go inside. When I finally did, Jenna was in the bathroom, taking one of her elaborate evening showers. I looked around our apartment, really looked at it. The expensive throw pillows that I'd never questioned, the designer candles that cost $40 each, the artwork that Jenna had bought for inspiration. How much of this had I actually chosen? How much of our life together was really just me funding Jenna's vision of herself? "Carson?" Jenna called from the bathroom. "Can you bring me my phone? I left it on the kitchen counter." I picked up her phone, and the screen lit up with a text notification. "Max, tomorrow can't come soon enough. I have a surprise for you." My hands were shaking as I carried the phone to the bathroom door. "Here's your phone," I said, setting it on the counter. "Thanks, babe. You're the best." "You're the best." The same thing she'd said when I'd Venmo'd her money for her date with Max. That's when I knew. The old Carson, the understanding, accommodating, generous Carson, was gone, and the new Carson was going to be a very different kind of man. The next morning, I started making phone calls. The first call I made was to our landlord, Mrs. Kowalski. She was 73 years old, sharp as a tack, and had never liked Jenna. "Carson, sweetheart," she said when I explained the situation. "I've been waiting 3 years for you to grow a backbone. That wife of yours has been trouble since day one. I need to know about removing her from the lease. Already looked into it after she threw that tantrum about the parking space last month. Since you're the primary leaseholder and you've never missed a payment, I can have her removed with 30 days' notice. Just need documentation that she's violated the lease terms." "What kind of documentation?" "Well, the lease specifically prohibits using the apartment for business purposes. All those styling consultations she's been having here, that's a violation." I hadn't even thought about that, but Mrs. Kowalski was right. Jenna had been meeting clients in our apartment regularly, always when I wasn't home. "I'll get you the documentation you need," I said. The second call was to my bank. Within an hour, I'd closed our joint accounts and opened new ones in my name only. Every automatic payment, every direct deposit, every financial connection between Jenna and me was severed. The third call was to my lawyer, not Ms. Vance, but a family law attorney named Robert Chen, who specialized in what he called strategic divorces. "Mr. Hale," he said after reviewing my situation, "Massachusetts is a no-fault divorce state, which means the affair itself won't affect property division. But if we can prove that marital assets were used to fund the affair, that's a different story." "How so?" "It's called dissipation of marital assets. Essentially, if your wife used joint funds to support her relationship with this other man, you can claim those expenditures in the settlement." I thought about all those expensive lunches, the designer clothes, the mysterious work expenses. "I have documentation of everything," I said. "Good. There's something else we should discuss. Your wife's social media presence." I frowned. "What about it?" "She's built what appears to be a personal brand around being a successful, independent businesswoman. If we can demonstrate that this image is fraudulent, that her lifestyle is actually funded by your income while she pursues an extramarital affair, it could be very damaging to her professionally." "You want to destroy her career?" "I want to protect your interests. If she's been misrepresenting her financial situation to potential clients or business partners, that's relevant to your case." That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I really looked at Jenna's Instagram account. What I found was a carefully curated lie. Photo after photo of expensive meals, designer outfits, luxury experiences, all presented as evidence of her success as an independent businesswoman. Captions like, "treating myself because I'm worth it," "now and self-made entrepreneur boss life," and "when you work hard, you play hard," "yabo entrepreneur, chatwarna, living my best life." The comments from her followers were telling. "Goals. How do you afford all this? Drop your financial tips." "Teach me your ways, queen." "What's your secret to success?" Jenna never answered these questions directly, but she'd respond with vague platitudes about knowing your worth and investing in yourself. It was all funded by my salary, and she was taking credit for it. But it was her recent posts that really caught my attention. Over the past month, she'd been posting more frequently, and the content was different, more expensive, more intimate. A photo of champagne flutes with the caption, "Celebrating new opportunities, blessed." A picture of her wearing jewelry I'd never seen with, "Sometimes the universe sends you exactly what you need, grateful." A selfie taken in what was clearly a hotel room. "Self-care Sunday, check or treat yourself." I screenshot everything. That evening, Jenna came home later than usual, practically glowing with excitement. "Carson, you'll never believe what happened today," she said, dropping her purse on the kitchen counter. "Max introduced me to some of his business associates, and they're interested in having me style their entire executive team." "That's great," I said, not looking up from my laptop. "What kind of budget are we talking about?" "Well, it's still in the negotiation phase, but it could be really significant, like career-changing significant." "Congratulations. When do you start?" "There are still some details to work out, but Max thinks it could happen within the next few weeks." Max thinks. Everything in Jenna's professional life seemed to revolve around what Max thought. "Speaking of Max," I said carefully, "I've been thinking it would be nice to meet him. Maybe we could have him and his wife over for dinner." Jenna's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, that's sweet, but Max is really private about his personal life. He keeps business and family very separate." "I'm sure his wife would understand. After all, you're working closely with her husband. She might appreciate knowing who he's spending time with." "Carson, why are you being weird about this?" "I'm not being weird. I just think it's normal for spouses to meet each other's business associates. Not everyone operates the way you do. Some people maintain professional boundaries." "Professional boundaries." "Right. The next morning, I put my plan into action. I'd been thinking about what Ms. Vance had said about Max's pattern of behavior. If he'd done this before, there had to be other women, other affairs, and if there were other women, some of them might be willing to share their experiences. It took me 3 days of careful social media stalking, but I found them. 2 other women who'd had suspiciously similar business relationships with Max over the past 2 years. One was a personal trainer who'd posted photos of expensive gifts from a grateful client. The other was a real estate agent who'd been featured in several photos at high-end restaurants, always tagged with vague references to business dinners. I created a fake email account and reached out to both of them. The personal trainer, whose name was Lisa, responded within hours. "Are you talking about Max Harrison?" she wrote. "Tall, drives a silver BMW, always talking about his import business? If so, run. That man is poison." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Cambridge. Lisa was in her late 20s, athletic, and clearly still angry about whatever had happened between her and Max. "He has a whole routine," she told me. First, he identifies married women who are unsatisfied with their lives. Then he presents himself as this successful businessman who can help advance their careers. He's generous with gifts and attention, makes them feel special and appreciated. What's the end game? Closeness, obviously, but it's more than that. He gets off on the power dynamic. These women think they're using him for career advancement, but really he's using them for entertainment. What happened between you two? I thought I was special. I thought he was going to leave his wife and we'd build a life together. Instead, I found out I was just the latest in a long line of side pieces. She leaned forward. The worst part? He never intended to help any of us professionally. All those business connections he promised, they don't exist. He just tells women what they want to hear. What do you mean? The executive styling job he probably promised your wife? It's bullshit. Max doesn't have business associates who need styling services. He's not even that successful. Most of his money comes from his wife's family. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Jenna wasn't just having an affair, she was being conned. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I wish someone had warned me, and because Max Harrison deserves to have his life blown up the way he's blown up so many marriages. That evening, I confronted Jenna directly. "We need to talk," I said as she walked through the door. Something in my tone must have warned her because her entire demeanor changed. The bright, chatty persona disappeared, replaced by something wary and defensive. "What about?" "About Max Harrison. About your affair. About the fact that you've been lying to me for months." The color drained from her face. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it. Then her shoulders squared, and I saw a flash of the real Jenna, the one who'd been hiding behind the performance. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Long enough. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" She sat down on our couch, and for the first time in months, she looked genuinely vulnerable. "Carson, it's not what you think. What I think is that you've been having an affair with a married man, using our joint funds to pay for it, and lying to me about everything from your work schedule to your professional prospects. It's not an affair, it's complicated." "Complicated how?" "Max understands me in a way that you don't. He sees my potential. He believes in my ambitions. By promising you business opportunities that don't exist?" She looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean Max Harrison is a con artist who targets married women with promises of career advancement. The executive styling job? It's fake. His business associates? They don't exist. You're not his business partner, Jenna. You're his latest victim." I watched her face as the truth sank in, the denial, the anger, and finally the humiliation. "You're lying," she said, but her voice was weak. "I have documentation. Photos, credit card statements, testimony from other women he's done this to. Max Harrison has been playing you, and you've been so desperate to believe you were special that you destroyed our marriage for a fantasy." She started crying then, not the pretty, delicate tears she used when she wanted something, but ugly, desperate sobs. "Carson, please. I made a mistake. I can fix this." "How? By going back to Max and pretending I don't know? By continuing to lie about where you spend your days and who you spend them with? I'll end it. I'll never see him again." "It's too late for that." "What do you mean?" I pulled out the papers I'd been carrying in my jacket pocket. "I mean, I've already filed for divorce, and tomorrow morning you're going to find out that you no longer have access to our bank accounts, you're being removed from the lease, and your affair is about to become very public knowledge." She stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. "You can't do this." "I already have. Carson, please. I love you." "No, you don't. You love what I provide. There's a difference." That night, Jenna slept in the guest room. The next morning, she discovered that her debit card had been declined when she tried to buy her usual expensive coffee. By noon, she'd received notice from Mrs. Kowalski that she had 30 days to vacate the apartment. By evening, Elise Harrison had filed for divorce from Max, citing dissipation of marital assets and providing detailed documentation of his affairs. And by the end of the week, someone, I never found out who, had created a social media account called Boston Affairs Exposed that featured screenshots of text messages between Max and his various lovers, including Jenna. The account gained 3,000 followers in its first day. Jenna's carefully curated image as a successful, independent businesswoman crumbled overnight. The comments on her Instagram posts went from admiring to savage. So this is how you afford your lifestyle? By sleeping with married men? Girl, you're not a boss babe. You're a homewrecker. Imagine being this delusional about your own life. She tried to control the narrative, posting a long caption about growth and learning from mistakes. But it was too late. The story had taken on a life of its own. Within a week, she'd lost most of her legitimate clients. Within 2 weeks, she'd moved back in with her parents. And Max? Max discovered that his wife had been far more strategic than he'd realized. Not only had she documented every affair, but she'd also been quietly moving assets into accounts he couldn't access. The man who'd presented himself as a successful businessman was about to find out what it felt like to live on a budget. As for me, I was finally sleeping through the night for the first time in months, but I wasn't done yet. 3 weeks after the divorce papers were filed, I was settling into my new apartment when Dev knocked on my door with a 6-pack of beer and a grin. "So," he said, making himself comfortable on my new couch, "I saw the Instagram drama. Please tell me you're the mysterious genius behind Boston Affairs Exposed." "I can neither confirm nor deny," I said, accepting a beer. "Dude, you're like a completely different person. The old Carson would have tried to work things out, gone to counseling, maybe written Jenna a heartfelt letter about his feelings. He wasn't wrong. The old Carson had been a people pleaser, someone who avoided conflict and tried to make everyone happy. The new Carson had learned that sometimes the best way to solve a problem was to burn it down and start over." "Speaking of burning things down," Dev continued, "I heard through the grapevine that Max Harrison is having some serious problems." I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of problems?" "Well, apparently his wife cleaned out their joint accounts before she filed for divorce, and word is getting around about his extracurricular activities. Turns out a lot of his business relationships were actually with the husbands of women he was sleeping with." I almost felt sorry for Max. Almost. The next morning, I got a call from an unknown number. "Is this Carson Hale?" The voice was male, nervous. "Who's asking?" "My name is David Chen. I think you know my wife, Lisa. She said you might be interested in hearing from some other people who've had experiences with Max Harrison." Lisa had given my contact information to other people in Max's orbit. Within a week, I'd heard from 6 different men whose wives or girlfriends had been targeted by Max over the past 3 years. We decided to meet. The group that assembled at a bar in Somerville looked like a support group for the romantically devastated. There was David, whose wife had left him for Max before Max dumped her. There was Marcus, whose girlfriend had maxed out her credit cards buying gifts for Max. There was Tom, whose wife had been so convinced that Max was going to make her a business partner that she'd quit her job. "The thing that gets me," said David, "is how systematic it was. He had a type, a method, a whole playbook." "What's his type?" I asked. "Married women in their late 20s or early 30s who feel undervalued in their relationships. Women who work in creative or service industries where success is subjective. Women who are active on social media and care about their image." It was like he was describing Jenna perfectly. "The method is always the same," added Marcus. "He presents himself as a successful businessman, promises career opportunities, showers them with attention and gifts, makes them feel like they're special, like they deserve better than what they have. And then? Then he gets bored and moves on to the next one, but not before he's destroyed their marriages and their self-respect." Tom leaned forward. "The question is, what are we going to do about it?" That's how the plan was born. We called ourselves the Max Harrison Accountability Project, and our goal was simple: make sure Max faced real consequences for his actions. Phase 1 was financial. Elise Harrison had already done most of the heavy lifting by freezing their joint accounts and filing for divorce, but we helped by providing testimony about Max's spending patterns and the timeline of his affairs. Phase 2 was professional. It turned out that Max's import business was actually a small consulting firm that relied heavily on referrals and reputation. Several of us had connections in Boston's business community, and we made sure that everyone knew about Max's character issues. Phase 3 was social. Max had always been careful to keep his affairs separate from his social circle, but we made sure that his friends, neighbors, and business associates knew exactly what kind of man he really was. But it was Phase 4 that I'm most proud of. Max drove a silver BMW that he clearly loved more than his wife. It was always perfectly clean, always parked in the same spot at his downtown office building, always treated like a precious object. One Saturday morning, I followed him to his office. He parked in his usual spot and went inside, probably to avoid being at home with Elise, who was no doubt making his life miserable. I waited until the parking garage was empty, then I got to work. I didn't damage his car. That would have been illegal. Instead, I decorated it. Using washable paint, I wrote "cheater" across his windshield. I covered his windows with printouts of his text messages to various women. I tied pink ribbons to his door handles and mirrors. But the piece de resistance was the sign I taped to his driver's side window. "This car belongs to Max Harrison, serial adulterer and con artist. Ask me about my 5 affairs." Then I waited. Max emerged from his office building 2 hours later, talking on his phone and looking stressed. When he saw his car, he stopped in his tracks. The parking garage wasn't empty anymore. It was Saturday afternoon, and there were families coming and going, people running errands, teenagers hanging out. At least 20 people witnessed Max's meltdown. He started screaming, actually screaming at no one in particular. He tried to rip the signs off his car, but I'd used industrial tape. He tried to scrub the paint off his windshield with his bare hands. Someone started filming. Within hours, a video titled "Boston Businessman Has Epic Meltdown Over Cheating Scandal" had been viewed 50,000 times on social media. But I wasn't done with Max yet. The next phase of my revenge was more subtle, but infinitely more satisfying. Max lived in a luxury apartment building in Back Bay, the kind of place where image was everything and gossip traveled fast. I'd learned from Elise that Max was desperate to maintain his reputation in the building, especially since several potential business contacts lived there. So I started a campaign of strategic embarrassment. First, I had flowers delivered to his apartment every day for a week. The cards were signed with names like "Your Secret Admirer," "Thanks for last night," and "Can't wait to see you again." The delivery drivers were instructed to be very loud and obvious about the deliveries, making sure the neighbors noticed. Then I had women's clothing delivered to his apartment. Lingerie, dresses, shoes, all in different sizes, all with gift cards that said things like "For our special weekend" and "Something to remember me by." The building's concierge started giving Max very strange looks. Finally, I arranged for a singing telegram to be delivered to Max's office. A woman in a sparkly dress showed up during his busiest day of the week and serenaded him with a song I'd written specifically for the occasion. "Max Harrison, you're so fine. You break up marriages all the time, but now your wife has left you too. Karma's coming straight for you." His coworkers filmed the entire performance. By the end of the month, Max Harrison had become a laughingstock. His business was failing, his wife had taken him for everything he was worth, and his reputation was destroyed. But the most satisfying revenge came from an unexpected source, Jenna herself. Apparently, Jenna had been trying to contact Max ever since our confrontation, desperate to salvage something from the wreckage of her life. She'd been calling, texting, even showing up at his office building. Max, who was dealing with his own problems, had been ignoring her completely. So Jenna decided to make a grand gesture. She showed up at Max's apartment building on a Tuesday evening, dressed in the red dress he'd once complimented, carrying a bottle of expensive champagne she'd bought with money borrowed from her parents. What she didn't know was that Elise was there, collecting the last of her belongings before the divorce was finalized. The confrontation in the lobby was spectacular. Elise, who was already furious about the divorce proceedings, took one look at Jenna and unleashed 3 years of pent-up rage. "You must be the stylist," Elise said, her voice dripping with contempt. "The one who thought she was special." Jenna, who had probably been expecting to find Max alone and vulnerable, was completely unprepared for this encounter. I was just... You were just what? Coming to comfort my soon-to-be ex-husband? How thoughtful." Elise looked Jenna up and down. "You know, I actually feel sorry for you. You destroyed your marriage for a man who was never going to leave his wife, never going to make you a business partner, and never going to give you anything more than cheap thrills and cheaper promises." "That's not true," Jenna said weakly. "Isn't it? Tell me, how's that executive styling contract working out for you? The one Max promised you?" "Oh wait, that's right. It never existed." Jenna's face crumpled. "Here's some free advice," Elise continued. "Max Harrison is a predator who targets insecure women with delusions of grandeur. He told you exactly what you wanted to hear, and you were so desperate to believe it that you threw away your real life for a fantasy." Elise walked away, leaving Jenna standing in the lobby with her champagne and her shattered illusions. The building's security cameras captured the entire exchange, and somehow, I really don't know how, the footage ended up on social media. The comments were brutal. This is what happens when you mistake being a side piece for being special. Imagine showing up to comfort the man who ruined your marriage, only to get read for filth by his wife. The secondhand embarrassment is real. Jenna deleted her Instagram account the next day. As for Max, he moved out of Boston entirely. Last I heard, he was living in a studio apartment in Worcester, working as a sales associate at a car dealership. His BMW had been repossessed. The divorce proceedings took 6 months, but they were worth the wait. Because Massachusetts allows for the recovery of dissipated marital assets, I was able to claim every penny that Jenna had spent on her affair. The final settlement gave me the apartment, the car, and most of our savings. Jenna got her debt and her regrets. On the day the divorce was finalized, I treated myself to dinner at the same steakhouse where this whole thing had started. I ordered the most expensive steak on the menu, paired it with a bottle of wine that cost more than Jenna used to spend on a single outfit, and raised a toast to my new life. Jake, the waiter who'd witnessed Jenna's humiliation months earlier, was working that night. "Hey, aren't you the guy whose wife had the meltdown about the check?" he asked. "Ex-wife," I corrected. "And yes." He grinned. "Dude, that was legendary. We still talk about it. The way you just paid your half and walked out? Chef's kiss?" "Sometimes you have to know your worth," I said. "Amen to that. This one's on the house," he said, refilling my wine glass. As I sat there, enjoying my expensive meal and my hard-won peace of mind, I reflected on everything that had happened. The old Carson would have tried to save his marriage. He would have gone to counseling, written heartfelt letters, maybe even tried to win Jenna back with grand romantic gestures. The new Carson understood that some things can't be saved, and some people don't deserve second chances. Jenna had called me boring, predictable, lacking in vision. She'd seen my stability as a weakness, my loyalty as something to be exploited. She'd been wrong about everything except one thing. I really had been predictable. But predictable Carson was gone. The man who'd emerged from the wreckage of his marriage was someone entirely different, someone who understood that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be a victim. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very patient, the best revenge is watching your enemies destroy themselves while you build something better. I finished my steak, left Jake a generous tip, and walked out into the Boston night, finally free. But as I would soon discover, freedom comes with its own set of challenges. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I thought the Carson Hale revenge saga was over. I had my new apartment, my restored bank account, and my self-respect. Jenna was living with her parents and working at a department store cosmetics counter. Max had fled Boston entirely. Justice had been served. I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning when Dev burst into my office looking like he'd seen a ghost. "Dude, you need to see this," he said, shoving his phone in my face. On the screen was a Facebook post from someone named Jenny M. The profile picture was blurry, but the content was crystal clear. Some of you may remember my ex-husband, Carson Hale, who destroyed our marriage because he couldn't handle having a successful, independent wife. What you don't know is the real story about his abusive behavior and financial manipulation. I'm finally ready to tell the truth about what really happened. Surviving abuse, my truth. The post had already been shared dozens of times. "Jenny M?" I said. "It's Jenna, obviously. She's using a fake name, but look at the mutual friends. It's definitely her." I scrolled through the comments, my stomach sinking with each one. I always knew something was off about that guy. "Thank you for being brave enough to share your story. Men like this need to be exposed." "She's trying to rewrite history," I said. "It gets worse," Dev said, taking his phone back. "She's been commenting on other posts, building up this whole narrative about how you isolated her from her friends and controlled her finances." I spent the rest of the day monitoring social media, watching Jenna's campaign unfold. She was being strategic about it, never making accusations that were specific enough to be legally actionable, but painting a picture of me as a controlling, manipulative husband who had financially abused her. The most infuriating part was how she twisted the truth. My decision to separate our finances became, he cut off my access to money to punish me. My documentation of her affair became, he stalked me and violated my privacy. My refusal to pay for her expensive lifestyle became, he used money as a weapon to control me. That evening I called my lawyer. "Can she do this?" I asked Robert Chen. "Unfortunately, yes. Nothing she's posted is technically libelous. She's sharing her feelings and experiences rather than making factual claims. And even if it were actionable, social media defamation cases are notoriously difficult to win. So I just have to let her destroy my reputation? Not necessarily. The best defense against a false narrative is a true one. You have documentation of everything that actually happened. If this escalates, we can present the facts. But I didn't want to wait for it to escalate. I'd learned something important over the past year. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense. I started with a simple Facebook post of my own. I've become aware that my ex-wife has been sharing her version of our marriage on social media. While I respect everyone's right to tell their story, I believe in the importance of truth and accountability. For anyone interested in the documented facts of our relationship and divorce, I'm happy to share the court records, which are public information. Then I did something that would have horrified the old Carson. I made the records public myself. I created a simple website called The Truth About Carson and Jenna and uploaded everything. The bank statements showing Jenna's excessive spending, the text messages between her and Max, the testimony from other women Max had manipulated, the documentation of her affair and the financial impact it had on our marriage. I didn't editorialize or attack Jenna personally. I just presented the facts, with timestamps and context, and let people draw their own conclusions. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 24 hours, my website had been viewed over 10,000 times. Jenna's Facebook post was flooded with new comments. "Girl, you might want to delete this. The receipts are not in your favor." Imagine trying to play victim when there's literal documentation of you cheating. This is embarrassing. Just take the L and move on. But Jenna doubled down. She posted a long, rambling response claiming that I had weaponized our private information and that my website was further proof of my abusive behavior. That's when our mutual friends started getting involved. Blair, Jenna's former best friend and enabler, posted her own response. I stayed quiet during Carson and Jenna's divorce because I didn't want to take sides. But since Jenna is now publicly claiming to be a victim of abuse, I feel obligated to share what I actually witnessed. Carson was never abusive. He was patient, generous, and supportive. Jenna was the one who was manipulative and dishonest. I have screenshots of conversations where she bragged about using Carson's money to fund her affair. This victim narrative is disgusting and insulting to actual abuse survivors. Other people started sharing their own experiences. Tom and Sarah, the couple from that disastrous dinner at the steakhouse, posted about how uncomfortable Jenna had made them with her entitled behavior and obvious disrespect for me. Even Mrs. Kowalski, my former landlord, weighed in. I've been a landlord for 30 years, and I've seen every kind of tenant drama you can imagine. Carson Hale was respectful, responsible, and honest. His ex-wife was demanding, manipulative, and tried to use my apartment for business purposes without permission. The idea that he was abusive is laughable. Within a week, public opinion had shifted completely. Jenna went from sympathetic victim to obvious fraud. Her fake Facebook account was reported and suspended. Her real social media accounts were flooded with criticism. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source, Max Harrison himself. Apparently, Max had been keeping track of the social media drama from his new life in Worcester. When he saw Jenna trying to position herself as a victim, he decided to set the record straight. He posted a detailed account of their affair on his own Facebook page, complete with screenshots of their text conversations. The post was titled, "Taking Responsibility for My Actions and Setting the Record Straight." In it, he admitted to targeting married women, acknowledged that he had manipulated Jenna with false promises of business opportunities, and confirmed that their relationship had been purely private. Most damaging of all, he shared text messages where Jenna had complained about me, calling me boring and clueless, and expressing excitement about spending my money on their dates. Jenna Marlowe was a willing participant in our affair, he wrote. She knew I was married, she knew she was married, and she actively participated in deceiving her husband. The idea that she was somehow a victim in this situation is false. We were both selfish people who made terrible choices, and we both deserve the consequences. The post went viral. Jenna's narrative collapsed completely. The few people who had been defending her went silent. Her parents, who had been supporting her financially, reportedly kicked her out of their house. But Jenna still wasn't done. 2 weeks later, I was having dinner at a restaurant near my office when she appeared at my table. She looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes were wrinkled, and she had the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't been sleeping. But there was something else in her expression, something desperate and dangerous. "Carson," she said, sliding into the seat across from me without being invited. "We need to talk." "No, we don't," I said calmly. "We have nothing to talk about. Please, just 5 minutes." The restaurant was busy, and other diners were starting to stare. I didn't want to cause a scene, so I nodded. 5 minutes. "I know you're angry," she began. "I know I hurt you, but what you've done to me, It's destroying my life. What I've done to you, Jenna, I told the truth. I shared documented facts about our marriage and your affair. You've turned everyone against me. I can't get a job. I can't find an apartment. I can't even go to the grocery store without people recognizing me and whispering. That's not my fault. That's the consequence of your choices. I made a mistake, Carson. One mistake, and you've made sure I'll pay for it for the rest of my life. I looked at her across the table, this woman I'd once loved, who had betrayed me so completely, and felt nothing but pity. It wasn't one mistake, Jenna. It was months of lies, manipulation, and theft. You didn't just cheat on me, you stole from me, lied to me, and then tried to destroy my reputation when you got caught. I was confused. I was unhappy. I made bad choices, but I'm not a bad person. Maybe not. But you're not my problem anymore. I stood up to leave, but she grabbed my wrist. Carson, please, I'm begging you. Take down the website. Tell people you forgive me. Help me rebuild my life. Why would I do that? Because you loved me once. Because we had good times together. Because it's the right thing to do. I looked down at her hand on my wrist, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of the old Carson, the people-pleaser who wanted everyone to be happy, who avoided conflict at all costs. Then I remembered the text messages where she'd called me boring and clueless. I remembered the credit card statements showing how she'd spent my money on dates with another man. I remembered the humiliation I'd felt when I realized that everyone in our social circle had known what was happening, except me. The right thing to do, I said, gently removing her hand from my wrist, would have been for you to be honest with me from the beginning. The right thing to do would have been for you to end our marriage before you started your affair. The right thing to do would have been for you to take responsibility for your actions instead of trying to paint yourself as a victim. Carson, I'm not responsible for rebuilding your life, Jenna. You destroyed it all by yourself. I left money on the table for my meal and walked away. Behind me, I heard Jenna start to cry. Loud, attention-getting sobs that made every person in the restaurant turn to look. But I didn't look back. The next morning, Dev knocked on my office door with a grin and a cup of coffee. So I heard you had dinner with the ex-wife last night, he said. How did you hear about that? Someone filmed the whole thing and posted it on TikTok. It's got like 50,000 views. He showed me his phone. Sure enough, there was a video of our conversation, taken from across the restaurant. The audio wasn't great, but you could clearly see Jenna grabbing my wrist, me calmly removing her hand, and her dramatic breakdown after I left. The comments were savage. The audacity of this woman is unreal. She cheats on him, tries to ruin his reputation, and then expects him to help her? Delusional. This is what accountability looks like, ladies. I love how calm and classy he stayed while she had a whole meltdown. That afternoon, I got a call from Robert Chen. Carson, I just got off the phone with Jenna's lawyer. She's prepared to sign a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for you taking down your website and refraining from any further public discussion of your marriage. What kind of NDA? Mutual non-disclosure. Both of you agree to stop talking about each other publicly. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. No. No? I'm not signing anything that prevents me from telling the truth about what happened. If Jenna wants to rebuild her reputation, she can do it by taking responsibility for her actions and making better choices going forward. Carson, this could end the whole thing. You could move on with your life. I have moved on with my life. I have a great job, a nice apartment, and my self-respect. I'm not giving Jenna any more power over my story. That evening, I updated my website with a final post. This will be my last public statement about my marriage and divorce. I've shared the documented facts of what happened, and I stand by every word. I'm not interested in continuing this drama or in helping my ex-wife manage the consequences of her choices. I wish her well in her future endeavors, but I'm moving forward with my life. To everyone who has supported me through this process, thank you. To everyone who has learned something from my experience, I hope it helps you make better choices in your own relationships. The truth matters. Accountability matters. And sometimes, the best thing you can do for yourself is simply refuse to be a victim. I never heard from Jenna again. 6 months later, I ran into Blair at a coffee shop near my office. She looked embarrassed when she saw me, but she came over to my table anyway. Carson, hi, how are you? I'm good, Blair, really good. How are you? I'm okay. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. About everything. I should have said something earlier when I knew what Jenna was doing. I should have been a better friend to both of you. You were loyal to your friend. I can't fault you for that. She wasn't a good friend to me, though, or to you. I see that now. What's she up to these days? I asked, genuinely curious. She moved to Florida. Got a job at a resort, I think. She's not on social media anymore. That's probably for the best. Carson, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you ever regret it? The way you handled everything, some people said you went too far. I thought about the question seriously. Did I regret exposing Jenna's affair and holding her accountable for her actions? Did I regret refusing to be painted as an abuser when I was actually the victim? No, I said finally. I don't regret it at all. For the first time in my adult life, I stood up for myself. I refused to be taken advantage of, and I made sure the truth came out. That's not something I'm going to apologize for. Blair nodded. I think you're right. I think maybe more people should handle things the way you did. After she left, I sat in the coffee shop for a while, thinking about everything that had happened over the past 2 years. The old Carson had been a good man, but he'd been weak. He'd prioritized keeping the peace over standing up for himself. He'd been so afraid of conflict that he'd allowed himself to be taken advantage of by the person who was supposed to love him most. The new Carson was still a good man, but he was strong. He understood that sometimes conflict is necessary, that sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to fight back. I'd learned that accountability isn't cruel, it's necessary. I'd learned that the truth doesn't become less true just because it's inconvenient. And I'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to refuse to enable their destructive behavior. Jenna had called me boring, predictable, lacking in vision. She'd been wrong about the vision part. I'd had plenty of vision. I'd seen exactly what she was doing, and I'd responded accordingly. As for boring and predictable, well, maybe I was. But boring and predictable had rebuilt my life from the ground up. Boring and predictable had exposed the truth and held people accountable for their actions. Boring and predictable had won. I finished my coffee, left a generous tip, and walked back to my office, where I had work to do and a life to live. A life that was finally, completely mine. 1 year after the divorce was finalized, I was living my best life. I'd been promoted to senior IT project manager, which came with a substantial raise and my own office. I'd started dating again. Nothing serious, just enjoying the company of women who appreciated honesty and shared expenses. Most importantly, I'd learned to value myself in a way I never had before. I thought the Jenna chapter of my life was permanently closed. I was wrong. It was a Friday evening in November when everything came full circle. I was having dinner at the same steakhouse where this whole saga had begun, celebrating my promotion with Dev and a few other coworkers. Jake, the waiter who'd witnessed Jenna's original meltdown, was working that night and had been taking excellent care of our table. You know, Jake said as he refilled my wine glass, you're like a legend here. The other servers still talk about the night you walked out on your wife. It was epic. Ex-wife, I corrected automatically. Right. Well, she certainly made an impression on Boston. I heard she tried to come back to town a few months ago, but it didn't go well. I was about to ask what he meant when Dev, who had been checking his phone, suddenly went pale. Carson, he said quietly, you need to see this. He showed me his phone screen. It was a local news article with the headline, Former Boston Socialite Arrested in Florida Resort Embezzlement Scheme. Jenna had been working as an event coordinator at a luxury resort in Miami. According to the article, she'd been systematically overcharging clients and pocketing the difference, using her position to run what amounted to a sophisticated fraud operation. The scheme had apparently been going on for months before resort management caught on. The total amount embezzled was over $60,000. Jesus, Dev said. She really couldn't help herself, could she? I kept reading. The article mentioned that Jenna had been using fake social media accounts to promote herself as a successful event planner, posting photos of expensive events she claimed to have organized but had actually just attended as staff. It was the same pattern all over again. Lies, manipulation, and theft, all in service of maintaining an image she couldn't afford. But the most shocking detail was buried in the last paragraph. Jenna had apparently been living with a man named Robert Martinez, whom she'd told everyone was her fiancé. Martinez, who worked in real estate, claimed he'd had no idea about Jenna's criminal activity and was devastated to learn about her deception. According to the article, Martinez had been financially supporting Jenna while she built her business, paying for her apartment, her car, and her lifestyle expenses. She found another you, Dev said. Looks like it. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown Florida number. Carson, this is Robert Martinez. I got your number from a mutual friend. We need to talk. I excused myself from dinner and called him back. Mr. Hale, Robert said, his voice shaking. I don't know if you remember me, but I read about your situation online last year. I should have paid attention. What happened? Everything. Jenna, Jennifer, she told me her name was Jennifer. She's been lying to me about everything for 8 months. I thought she was building a successful event planning business. I thought we were building a life together. How did you find out? The police called me when they arrested her. They needed to search our apartment. That's when I discovered that she'd been using my credit cards, forging my signature on checks, even taking out loans in my name. My stomach dropped. How much? Over $100,000. My credit is destroyed. I might lose my house. Robert Martinez was me 2 years ago, a decent man who'd been targeted by a predator and systematically destroyed. Robert, I'm sorry this happened to you, but you need to document everything and get a good lawyer immediately. I already am. But Mr. Hale, there's something else. Something you need to know. What? She kept a journal. The police found it when they searched our place. It's all about you. What do you mean? Pages and pages about how you destroyed her life, how she was going to get revenge, how she was going to make you pay for what you did to her. She's been planning something, Mr. Hale, something big. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. What kind of something? I don't know all the details, but she was working with someone, another man, someone in Boston who was supposed to help her ruin your life the way you ruined hers. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Who? I don't know his name, but I have some of their text messages. The police gave me copies as part of the evidence. Can I send them to you? Yes, send everything. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a series of screenshots that made me freeze. The messages were between Jenna and someone named M, whose contact information had been deleted. But based on the content, it was clearly Max Harrison. Jenna, I'm ready to move forward with the plan. Robert is completely under my control. M. Good. How much have you been able to get from him? Jenna, about $80K so far, but I can get more. He trusts me completely. M. Perfect. Once you have enough, we can move to phase 2. Jenna, I can't wait to see Carson's face when he realizes what we've done. M. He destroyed both our lives. Now we destroy his. Jenna, what about the business thing? M. I've got a guy who can create fake companies, fake contracts, fake everything. We'll make it look like Carson has been embezzling from his employer. By the time anyone figures out it's fake, his reputation will be destroyed and he'll be facing criminal charges. Jenna, and then? M. Then we disappear with Robert's money and watch Carson's life burn down from a safe distance. I screenshot everything and immediately called my lawyer. Robert, I said, this is bigger than just embezzlement. They were planning to frame me for crimes I didn't commit. I know. That's why I called you. Mr. Hale, I'm so sorry. I had no idea what she was planning. It's not your fault. You were a victim, just like I was. What do we do now? Now we make sure they both face the consequences. The next morning, I was on a plane to Miami. Robert Martinez met me at the airport. He was about my age, clean-cut, and looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. In person, he seemed like a decent guy who'd been completely blindsided by Jenna's deception. Thank you for coming, he said as we drove to the police station. I didn't know who else to call. You did the right thing? How are you holding up? Honestly, I'm a mess. I thought I was going to marry this woman. I was planning to propose next month. I know the feeling. We met with Detective Maria Santos, who was handling Jenna's case. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who clearly had no patience for Jenna's manipulations. Ms. Marlowe has been very creative in her criminal endeavors, Detective Santos said, reviewing the file. The embezzlement from the resort was just the tip of the iceberg. She's also guilty of identity theft, credit card fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud. What about the plan to frame me? I asked. That's where things get interesting. We've been in contact with Boston PD about Maxwell Harrison. Turns out he's been busy since he left Massachusetts. She showed us a thick file. Max had been running various scams throughout New England, targeting divorced men and convincing them to invest in fake business opportunities. He'd stolen over $300,000 from victims across 4 states. We believe Ms. Marlowe was his partner in several of these schemes, Detective Santos continued. She would identify targets through social media, and he would approach them with investment opportunities. So they were working together the whole time? It appears so. The plan to frame you seems to have been personal revenge, but they were also running a broader criminal enterprise. What happens now? Now they both go to prison. Ms. Marlowe is looking at 5 to 7 years on the embezzlement and fraud charges. Mr. Harrison is looking at 10 to 15 for his multi-state operation. That afternoon, I did something I never thought I'd do. I visited Jenna in jail. She was being held at the Miami-Dade Correctional Center, waiting for her arraignment. When she walked into the visiting room, I barely recognized her. The woman who had once been obsessed with her appearance looked haggard and defeated. Her hair was unwashed, her skin was pale, and she'd lost significant weight. But it was her eyes that shocked me the most. They were empty, hollow, like all the fight had gone out of her. "Carson," she said, sitting down across from me, "I can't believe you're here. I came to ask you one question. Why?" She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I was angry. Because I blamed you for everything that went wrong in my life. So you decided to destroy an innocent man and frame me for crimes I didn't commit? I thought if I could make you feel the way you made me feel, somehow it would make things even. How did I make you feel, Jenna? Worthless, humiliated, like I was nothing." I stared at her across the metal table. "I never called you worthless. I never humiliated you in public. I never tried to destroy your reputation or frame you for crimes. You exposed my affair. I told the truth about what you did to our marriage. You turned everyone against me. You turned everyone against yourself by lying and cheating and stealing." She started crying then, not the performative tears she'd used during our marriage, but genuine, broken sobs. "I know," she said. "I know it was all my fault. I know I destroyed everything good in my life, but I was so angry, and Max made it seem like we could get back at you, and I wanted someone else to hurt the way I was hurting. So you targeted Robert. I told myself he was just a means to an end. I told myself I wasn't really hurting him because he'd never find out. But then I started to care about him, and I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I couldn't stop." "Why couldn't you stop?" "Because stopping would have meant admitting that everything I'd done was for nothing. It would have meant taking responsibility for destroying my own life instead of blaming you for it." We sat in silence for a few minutes. Finally, Jenna looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm sorry, Carson. I'm sorry for everything. For the affair, for the lies, for trying to hurt you. You didn't deserve any of it." "No, I didn't. I know this doesn't change anything, but I want you to know that you were a good husband. You were patient and kind and generous, and I threw it all away because I thought I deserved something better. What you deserved was to be honest about what you wanted instead of lying and cheating to get it. I know that now, but it's too late." I looked at this woman who had once been the center of my world, who had betrayed me so completely, who had tried to destroy my life even after our marriage was over. I felt nothing but pity for her. "Jenna, I hope you use your time in prison to figure out why you make the choices you make. I hope you learn to take responsibility for your actions, and I hope you find a way to become the kind of person who doesn't need to hurt others to feel good about herself. What about Robert? Will you tell him I'm sorry? Tell him yourself. Write him a letter. But don't expect forgiveness. He's going to be dealing with the consequences of your actions for years." I stood up to leave. "Carson? Yeah? Are you happy now? In your life, I mean?" I thought about the question. Was I happy? I had a job I enjoyed, friends who respected me, and the freedom to make choices without worrying about someone else's hidden agenda. I had my self-respect and my integrity intact. "Yeah," I said. "I really am. I'm glad. You deserve to be happy." I walked out of the jail and into the Miami sunshine, feeling like a chapter of my life had finally, truly closed. 6 months later, Jenna was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. Max got 12 years. Robert Martinez recovered most of his money through insurance and civil litigation, though his credit took years to repair. As for me, I got promoted again. I bought a house. I started a serious relationship with a woman named Sarah, who worked in marketing and insisted on splitting every check down to the penny. On the 2nd anniversary of my divorce, Dev and I went back to the same steakhouse where it all began. Jake was still working there, and he remembered us immediately. "The legend returns," he said, grinning. "I heard your ex-wife went to prison. Is that true?" "It's true," I said. "Damn. I mean, I'm sorry that happened, but also, damn. It's okay. She made her choices." "You know what I remember most about that night 2 years ago?" Jake said as he poured our wine. "It wasn't the drama or the meltdown. It was how calm you stayed, like you knew exactly what you were worth and you weren't going to settle for less." I learned that the hard way. Well, it was inspiring, man. I've told that story to probably 100 people. Sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, you know. After Jake left, Dev raised his glass. "To Carson Hale, who refused to be a victim and taught us all what accountability looks like." "To moving forward," I replied. We clinked glasses, and I realized that this was what victory actually felt like. Not the dramatic confrontations or the public humiliations or the satisfying moments of revenge. Victory was sitting in a restaurant where I'd once been humiliated, surrounded by people who respected me, living a life I'd built on my own terms. Victory was knowing that I'd faced the worst betrayal of my life and come out stronger. Victory was understanding that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's simply refusing to let other people's choices define your worth. Jenna had called me boring, predictable, lacking in vision. She'd seen my stability as weakness and my loyalty as something to exploit. She'd been wrong about everything. I wasn't boring, I was reliable, I wasn't predictable, I was consistent, and I didn't lack vision. I just had the vision to see people for who they really were and respond accordingly. The old Carson would have blamed himself for Jenna's betrayal, would have wondered what he could have done differently, would have tried to save a marriage that was already over. The new Carson understood that some people are broken in ways that can't be fixed by love or patience or understanding. Some people will take everything you give them and still want more. Some people will lie to your face while they're stabbing you in the back. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for them and for yourself, is to walk away and let them face the consequences of their choices alone. I finished my steak, left Jake a generous tip, and walked out into the Boston night, finally and completely free. Behind me, the restaurant hummed with conversation and laughter, full of people living their lives, making their choices, writing their own stories. I had written mine. It was a story about betrayal and revenge, about accountability and justice, about learning to value yourself enough to demand better. But most of all, it was a story about refusing to be a victim, no matter what anyone else tried to take from you. And that, I thought as I walked home to my house, my life, my future, was a story worth telling.